Channel 10.
I want to give you a big thank you for checking out the Channel 10 podcast and ask you to please support the show by subscribing, rating, liking, commenting, favoriting on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play Music, wherever you get your podcast from. That little bit definitely helps us to grow and expand the show. Tell a friend to tell a friend. If you have any questions, comments, sponsorship opportunities, or just want to say what's up to the Channel 10 podcast, you can shoot us an email, channel10podcast@gmail.com. Or you can also send us a text or leave us a voicemail. Just hit us up at 443-885-0997. Also, please check out channel10podcast.com. There you can check out all of the back episodes of the show, as well as keep up with everything that Sin God Superior and myself, Artic, have going on. There you'll also find links to all of our social media to connect with us. And also, you can order a t-shirt by clicking on the link at the top of the page. Also, you can show support by shopping through our Amazon portal at no cost to you. Whatever you buy, we'll get a little percentage of it. So, definitely show some support. We really appreciate it. Channel 10 Podcast presents the Wu-Tang Podcast, where we break down the Wu-Tang Clan's discography album by album. Check it out at WuTangPodcast.com and search for Wu-Tang Podcast wherever you get your podcast from. Definitely rate, subscribe, support that show. Tell a friend to tell a friend. We really appreciate it. Aside from this podcast, both myself and Sin God Superior have a lot going on. You can check out all of Sin God Superior's new music by going to singodsuperior.com or looking out for him on iTunes, Apple Music, Spotify, Tidal, wherever you get your music from. Same thing for myself. Check out everything I have going on at thealmightyar.com.
We used to be like, see you there, Channel 10. And we used to think that people would catch on. But if you're not from Queens, if you don't got Time Warner or whatever, like, well, I didn't know that.
Do it, yo. Yo, word up, man. It's different channels, son. Word up, on, man. Word up, watch the channel, son. Different plane now, man. It's all good. Word up, all good, baby, in every hood, son. Word up, yo. CNN, Network, Channel 10. It's on again.
Yo. We are back once again. This is the Channel 10 podcast. It is I, the almighty AR, Artic in the building, and I'm alongside
Sin God Superior.
And today we're joined by a very special guest, one of Baltimore's finest in the building, Joshua Harris. Say what's up to the people.
How you doing? How's everybody doing out there?
Yeah, we're doing all right over here, man. And you were just, I guess before we, go back into everything, Singar was just telling me that you were just coming out of a meeting.
Yeah. There's always something happening in the community where sometimes it's a scramble to figure out how the community should respond to things. Yeah.
Are you able to go into the details of exactly what was going on?
Not specifically for this, okay. But just a lot of things happen in the community, particularly around developing. And so there was a meeting called to figure out how we can get information put out there publicly so that people can be more aware and more engaged of what's happening. Because a lot of things happen behind closed doors because people aren't privy to information or they don't have seats at the table. And so it's really about how we can better disseminate that information to the community so people can be educated on specific issues, not just this one, but issues as a whole. People look up and they have a brand new apartment complex in their neighborhood that's charging $2,000 a month in rent, and they never knew that it was coming, and others may have known for 2 years. And so just bring people into the knowing where to find information and how we can get it out quicker. Okay,
that's definitely a worthwhile endeavor to pursue because it is hard to find that information. And I guess to get to the point of, where you are now when it comes to, your political awareness and everything, I guess we like to take it back to the beginning. So you're originally from Chicago, correct?
I am. I'm originally from Chicago, and Baltimore is home now.
Okay. What was it like growing up there?
I mean, Chicago is just a bigger version of Baltimore, you know, with the good and the bad, unfortunately. And so a lot of people may not notice, but Chicago is quite possibly, I like to say, the most segregated city in the country. Even the suburbs are segregated them. So understanding that dynamic and the reason, and understanding the reasons that Chicago sees such high violence is a result directly related to that segregation, to that isolated poverty, knowing that in fact, historically stems from Baltimore, knowing that Baltimore is the place where redlining was created, where 100 years ago they took a map, took a red pen and said black people can only live here and here. And that was the beginning of isolated poverty and hyper-segregation. And we see the results of that today in Baltimore. And knowing that Chicago took that and said, we can do it, and we can do it even better. And that's what they did. And so when you see the violence and the poverty we see in Chicago, it's a direct result of policies put in place 100 years ago that cut off access to opportunities, that cut off access to resources, and said that these people aren't valued enough to be included in the overall process. And so Chicago and Baltimore have very similar or parallel paths, if I might say so myself.
Now, one thing that you said is that the difference between Chicago and Baltimore is that there's more of a sense of hope in Baltimore than there is in Chicago in terms of actually changing some of these things. So could you elaborate on that a bit more?
Yeah, no, I think I mentioned that to you once before, that Chicago, you see like the violence has gotten so extreme to where they're murdering, killing, and robbing people in broad daylight. And that, again, stems from hopelessness. Like, you have no other options. No one cares. No one's coming into our neighborhood. There's no opportunity for jobs. All the schools are closed down. I can't graduate or I can't get a diploma, so why even try? Why value life? And so I don't think that Baltimore is to that point of hopelessness that we see in Chicago just yet. I think that there's still an opportunity before the city gets there, or to stop the city or prevent the city from getting to that sense of hopelessness. And I think that's only going to come through, though, an investment in really people, and making sure that young people feel valued. They feel that their neighborhoods are valued, because all that is a reflection of self-worth. When you walk through neighborhoods and blocks of vacants every day, that's your environment. And so that is reflection, and it has a impact on how you value yourself and what you see as possible. If all you see is hopelessness and despair, then that's all you think that you have the ability to amount to. So making sure that we begin to make those investments from a policy standpoint and governmental standpoint to really build and rehabilitate communities, so that we don't have people living in the conditions where they're surrounded by what could look like war zones overseas, quite frankly, with the amount of vacancies we have in Baltimore. And then making sure that we're providing opportunities for people to be successful, whether that be through after-school programs, whether that be through employment, and making sure that people have the ability to get jobs or job training, job skills, invested in people, so that they see their worth and what they can become and the possibility of their potential. Does that make sense? Let me know if I ramble on.
No, that definitely makes a lot of sense. I was going to follow up with, how was it that you were able to kind of overcome that hopelessness and that situation, and and find the self-worth, coming from that type of environment?
Well, yeah, no, definitely. So for me, and everybody has their own out, if you will. I come from a relatively tough background where I've had family members who've done time in jail and seen a lot of stuff. And so for me, honestly, I tell folks all the time, it was a recreation center to start that was open and funded to save my life. And I went and I discovered basketball. And so then basketball, I know it's the tale that we hate to see the stereotype, but it gave me my out. And because of basketball, I was able to focus, and I knew I wanted to keep playing basketball, and it opened up a world of possibilities for me, where I would travel to play in different places, so I met different people. And then...
What's up, Channel 10 podcast listeners? Unfortunately, at this part in the interview, we did experience some technical difficulties, which resulted in some of the audio being lost, but we were able to continue, so we're going to pick right back up from that point.
about Keith Ellison and political focus, and him being the first openly Islamic congressman.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I volunteered on his campaign in college for a little bit. That was my first really introduction. And I I just volunteered, handed out some literature, worked at a poll, didn't do much, but that was my first, I guess, political involvement. And I'm not someone who's wanted to be in politics, though, because that was the question you'd ask. When did I begin or how did going to Augsburg, a smaller school, shape my view?
Yeah.
And so that was kind of my first introduction to looking at things from a policy standpoint, but not even from a policy standpoint, just doing anything politically and beginning to even look at politics at all. And so that all came through attending Augsburg in a smaller school and knowing people who were involved, and it really helped to shape my perspective of things for sure.
Mm-hmm. And I did read somewhere that you did a semester or two abroad at Oslo, right, Norway?
Yes, I left Augsburg, which is a small Norwegian Lutheran institution, and because we had a large Norwegian student population, I got some friends who were from Norway, and I wanted to visit. And I needed some more credits and things, and so I attended the University of Oslo there, and I also chased some hoop dreams and went out there and worked out with some basketball teams and spent some time there, and learned a lot, which further expanded my view and my perspective as a global citizen. At the University of Oslo, there was students from 83 different countries represented when I was there.
Wow.
So being able to have those conversations with people was really eye-opening. And you got to be somebody, too, that's willing to learn, willing to listen, and willing to be uncomfortable. And so a lot of times I'll go and I'll speak to people, young people in particular, and they don't like things when it's not normal or what they're used to. But we really grow and stretch ourselves when we become uncomfortable.
Right.
And so pushing through that culture shock, pushing through those cultural differences, and learning that we're all people and humans when it comes down to it, and that we have very similarities, but we just have cultural differences, and embracing those differences to learn was huge, again. And also taking note, Norway is one of the places that is a successful model of socialism, which sometimes scares people. To hear them say that, but they have universal health care, which is great. They have an actual rehabilitative prison system where individuals that get in trouble there and have to go to prison are not punished forever, but they're actually rehabilitated into society to be productive citizens. And so there's a lot of great things that we could take note from in Norway.
Now, you said putting yourself in difficult situations is the way that you grow. What were when you first touched down there? What were some of the things that really provided that culture shock for you? I'm just curious.
I mean, shucks. And when you overseas and no one's speaking the language that you're used to, right, that's a culture shock. Just the difference in the food. I played basketball, and I had some friends that played overseas and stuff, and I actually had some friends who came back because they didn't like the food.
Wow.
They turned down checks and came back to the States and decided to not play because they didn't like the food, and there wasn't a certain type of food or drinks available that they were used to. And so those are things where opportunities for us, little things, to really grow and stretch themselves. Or, they dress different, or I don't like that. So little things that make you uncomfortable because it's outside of your box. And we all have our boxes that we're in, and our norms, things that we're used to. And so just embracing them and being willing to push past them is part of that uncomfortability and growing yourself as a person, no matter what the situation is. I put myself in uncomfortable situations to this day that sometimes I don't want to. But you have to stretch yourself and to grow and expand your potential and your capacity.
Yeah, definitely. And coming back to the States, what led you to Baltimore?
I came to Baltimore to work for a community service fraternity that provides mentorships and scholarships to young African American boys and men. Alpha Phi Alpha's international headquarters is here in Baltimore, and so that is where I work. I came to work for Alpha Phi Alpha.
Okay. And I guess what were some of the first initiatives that you got involved in here, and what were like some of the problems that you tackled when you got here?
Well, yeah, no, I guess one of the things that piqued my interest growing up in Chicago, seeing how gentrification happened, and how places that were once really bad places to live in are now really nice places to live in. I was curious about that and how neighborhoods and cities were developed. And then I was also trying to find a place to live, and I found that it was really expensive to rent, but much more affordable to own. And that further piqued my interest in real estate. And why is it that way? Why does it cost more to rent than it does to own? And why do people think it's cheaper to rent and not know that they end up paying more in the long term? And so I began to do research on Baltimore and Baltimore's neighborhoods as I looked to purchase a home and things of that sort, and really understand the history of the neighborhoods and the makeup, and try to find out what was going on as I looked to purchase a house as well. And so in that, I purchased a house, and I began to get really involved in the neighborhood association to understand how decisions were made. A lot of people don't understand the power of neighborhood associations and the say that they have when it comes to things like zoning and permits and what gets approved when someone wants to do something in the neighborhood. And so really asking those questions and going to several meetings where usually I was the youngest person in the room and many times the only person of color in the room. Decisions are being made about entire communities, and sometimes a room that was not reflective of the actual community. And so I began to do work in the community. A couple of neighbors and I saw what was happening in the neighborhood and saw the potential of gentrification, or the possibility of gentrification coming, and decided we need to do something to counter it. A lot of people some people may think gentrification is a good thing. For me, I view gentrification as the spatial recognition of economic inequality. And so basically when properties or spaces that were once devalued all of a sudden have value and worth. And so in order to expand upon that value, the people that exist there have to be put somewhere else. And so for me, it was about understanding that when developing neighborhoods and communities, if you're not focused on empowering people, you're only displacing problems rather than creating solutions. So you're moving it from one place to another place and not empowering people to grow and develop and sustain themselves as infrastructure around them grows and develops. And so for me, we begin to do work in what we call creative placemaking, where you focus on creating an environment of belonging versus disbelonging to bring people to the table and create a bond of community, so that then we can focus on education, workforce development, and empowering people through that process. But we first have to make a connection and a communal bond so that people feel that you care, that there's a trust factor that exists there, that will ultimately, in the long run, if focused on, help to empower people as the neighborhood, help to empower and educate people as neighborhoods develop and change, so that one, they're aware, and then two, that they're able to sustain themselves as that neighborhood develops and changes. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because you were talking about before, like access to information when it comes to certain things. And, you know, I know that the neighborhood that I live in has an association, and, you know, every once in a while I'll get the flyer on my door, and it's like I know I should go because that's the only place to get the information about, you know, exactly what's happening here. But, you know, a lot of people don't even know that these neighborhood associations even exist. It's just like you're kind of living somewhere but not necessarily rooted to the community, which eventually, you know, can make you more susceptible to being pushed out. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and and to piggyback off of that, you bring up a good point, because when it comes to these neighborhood alliances, creative alliances, and associations, and various boards that Joshua, I think that you are a member of, like, about several different kinds of boards and alliances, I believe. How does one find out about these alliances? Do some of them, do they kind of play invisible to kind of keep people of color out of them?
I don't know that they play invisible. I think that it's just that if you aren't in certain circles or have certain relationships, you may not be privy to the information. It's kind of like one of those things where if you play sports or if you're a sneaker guy, you know all the sneaker people. You know who's talking about it on the blogs and writing about shoes and different things. And so that's your circle. And so in many cases, we just aren't in those circles. And so it takes people who are in those circles to bring back information and expose others to what's happening and bring them to the table to disseminate and help provide that information for people. And so that's what I focus on, and that's what I like to do, is make sure that I'm connecting people and organizations to resources that they need so they can know about what's happening.
Mm-hmm. Now, how did your activism and your community work, I guess, how did that progress into political aspirations?
I like to tell people I'm an accidental politician. I was just somebody who was going up to the recreation center in my neighborhood, playing with kids, coaching, doing some things there, doing a community resource fair here and there, doing back to school festivals and different things. And in that work, I was perfectly happy and perfectly fine serving my community and figuring out ways to build. But in that work, elected officials began to show up to events that were happening and that I was hosting or organizing, and they would show up for ribbon cuttings and photo opportunities, which is fine. That's good that they're there to support. But then I would use it as an opportunity to talk to them and to pick their brain and talk to them about solutions and things that I was learning about and history of the city that I was learning about and things that weren't being addressed, and talk to them about some of the solutions, many of which I put in my platform during my mayoral campaign. And in those conversations with many of the elected officials, I began to realize, first in those conversations, they would give me what I call the dear kitten, when they would be like, "Oh, good ideas, we'll be in touch." And I never heard anything follow up, and I would reach out to offices and never got a response back. And so I recognized two things: that one, they were disconnected from the average from the average person in the city, and two, they were just really concerned about their next election and staying elected more so than they were about the next generation and creating real change. And so in that, after I realized that it wasn't about being smart enough and having the best ideas, it was about reaching people. And can we reach people and let people know how government can function for them and how it's supposed to work, rather than waiting for someone else to step up to the plate and do it. I decided to do it myself. Said no more waiting. I'm going to do it.
All right, because I was surprised, just you telling that story, that you didn't become, more jaded towards the whole political process, but you instead kind of embraced it and took it upon your own to actually do something there. Now, when you first, delved into it, you started off as a Democrat?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then what led to the switch to the Green Party?
Well, yeah, I want to touch on the fact what you said about me embracing the process. I think that you can view things two ways, and I had mentors and coaches that used to say there's two types of people: those that watch and those that do. And so many people would take the route and say, complain, that's how all politicians are, that's they are. And very few people will step up to the plate and say that I'm going to do it for the right reasons and be the opposite of what is the norm here. And so that's what I wanted to do. I want to try to change the system. And that's still what I'm working to do every single day, is to change the system and not make that the norm. And it needs people, it needs for people to buy into that reality that not all people who start out running for political office are in it just for themselves or just to get elected, but really in it to create a change. And people buying into that vision is what's going to ultimately get us to the point to where we have elected officials who actually represent the people and not corporate interests. But back to your question about me starting out as a Democrat and then changing to the Green Party. Baltimore is a Democratic town, and it is a town where you will be ignored and not paid attention to if you're not a Democrat. And so for me, I was always torn in deciding the fact of whether or not I wanted to run as an independent because understanding the history of the Democratic Party in Baltimore and what's been enacted and what has happened, what decisions have been made here. The Democratic Party has been in control for 6 decades, essentially, and yet we've seen little to no change, particularly for people of color and in communities of color. And so for me, it was about understanding the history of Baltimore, and then 2, assessing where my values and views were most reflected. And so being a Democrat gave me the opportunity to have seats at tables and be invited to things that I probably wouldn't have otherwise been invited to, which began to create a buzz around me. But then 2, the Green Party was a party that was reflective of my views. It's a party that has been active in the fight for social justice, including racial justice, economic justice, and environmental justice, which are things that are all near and dear to my heart. It's been a party that has been looking to embrace diversity and differences, whether you look at the 2008, it being the first major party to run 2 women as their presidential candidates, where they ran Senator Cynthia McKinney out of Georgia as the presidential candidate with Rosa Clemente as her vice presidential candidate in 2008. That is huge for a party to step up and say, yes, let's do this. Not only 2 women, but 2 women of color. And we know that Rosa Clemente has been very active in the Black Lives Matter movement and the fight for social justice or racial justice in particular. And so to me, the values and views were very near and dear to my heart and most reflected what I wanted to be representative of myself and my brand. So I decided to run as a Green Party candidate.
Was there any fear putting yourself out there like that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. At a meeting I was at earlier, people asked me that same question because the Green Party isn't necessarily the most popular party. It's a third party. And it's not the popular thing to do always. And so I think that we need people, though, who are strong enough to step up to the plate and do what's different, to take those initial steps, to really begin to draw others into and say, oh, I can do that too. I mean, whether you talk about the integration of baseball and having somebody like Jackie Robinson, who was willing to step up to the plate and go out there and take that abuse to open it up for everyone, or any other situation, but someone has to step out there and be bold enough to be different and do things differently. And that's what I did, and it was something I had to think about. And I was able to make that decision again because I'm not someone who's wanted to be a politician my whole life. So there was no fear of me ruining my political potential, whereas there's a lot of people who won't do that because they don't want to ruin their political capital. And so for me, it was also questioning and deciding, was this about me winning or was this about me being revolutionary and being different? And so a lot of folks will say they want to be revolutionary and that they want a revolution, but nobody really wants to be a revolutionary because it's not popular to be a revolutionary until after the fact, after everything is said and done. Nobody wants to be that guy. Ask Nelson Mandela. Nobody wants to be in jail, not liked, ridiculed. No one wants to be put in those situations. But everyone acts like they do. And so I had to answer that question myself. What is most reflective of what I want to see come from this in a statement that I want to make, and a statement on principle? Is it a statement of principle, or is it a statement of power and me seeking power? And so that's definitely a conversation I had to do. It wasn't easy. At this point, I had been very involved politically with a lot of Democrats in the city and had worked a Democratic campaign and gotten a delegate elected or helped to get a delegate elected and had worked with Democratic Congress members. So I was advised against it by a lot of people. And so I had to make the tough decision to do it, you know?
Now, you mentioned in, I think, your Roughly Speaking interview that Rosa Clemente acted as a political mentor. Were there other people who played like a big role in your political career up to this point?
I mean, there's several people, different people who, when it comes to policy and really understanding policy. But for me, one of the first people that I reached out to when I was deciding was Rosa Clemente. And actually before that, Umi Salah of the Dream Defenders. He's executive director of the Dream Defenders out of Florida, which they occupied the governor's office after Trayvon Martin was killed. He's a good friend of mine. And I told him that I was considering running, and he was like, you need to talk to Rosa. And so I called Rosa, and I had met her before in Minneapolis, actually, years ago when I was in school, and we did a Vices to Verses hip-hop conference, and she came and she was one of the speakers there at the conference, and met her there and then with Dead Prez when they closed out the weekend. So it was a great experience. But I got the opportunity to talk to her and pick her brain, and she provided some insight to me as I was making my decision to run. And so, but there's several people who played a role in that. The delegate Charles Sidnor, who I helped worked his campaign to help get him elected. He's someone who did lots of work. There was lots of people who influenced me and were, I guess, mentors politically to me. Probably too many to name. And I'm a person who believes that we should have multiple mentors. And so I have mentors for different things. And so there's people who are great policy people. And I tell people this too all the time. I hate politics, but I love policy because that's what positively impacts people's lives. Right. Politics is the stuff that shouldn't exist, of I don't like this person because of this or that, so I'm not going to support this. Policy is actually the concrete changes and solutions that people bring to the table. And there's a difference. But unfortunately, you have to understand politics to even be able to get policy implemented. So I had multiple mentors in multiple different ways and still do, and are constantly accruing new mentors, if you will.
Now, your grandmother also, she was like a union organizer too, right?
Yes, she was. She was a union organizer in Chicago, and that played a big role too. And just my willingness to serve, give back to my community overall. Watching her do that work was extremely powerful. And she was always, to this day, she still is. They never retire. There's always a meeting for them to go to and something for them to plan and organize around. Somebody's trying to cut the minimum wage, or someone's trying to take the workers' rights away. And so she's very involved. And she was president of AFSCME Council 31 in the state of Illinois, which is actually, she had the pleasure of working or having a young man who many might know as President Barack Obama, who was a community organizer to help organize around fair wages and workers' rights. I watched a lot of things that she did. I watched her work around apartheid and with Nelson Mandela in South Africa and what was happening there, and many things. I didn't know what was happening until I was older. I thought about it. I was like, oh, this is what she was doing. But yeah, it was a huge part and played a huge role in some of my passion and commitment to give back.
Now, I guess going back to what you were saying about policy, one of the big things that really struck me that you brought to the table was the public banking, where I guess the money from the city would go into a bank that's in the city, and we would get all the interest from it. So I was just wondering where you got that idea from and how that stemmed, and why isn't that something that most people had ever really heard of before?
Oh, yeah. No, I made that all up myself. No, I'm just kidding. No, again, this is something of me being kind of a nerd and researching things that have been done in other places. And there's no need to reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of things that exist already that can be implemented. It just takes people who have the commitment to, one, find them, and then two, the willpower to implement them. And so public banking is something that exists. It's something that has been a lot of studies done around that has been proven successful. And so I had the luxury of being mentored by people like Dr. Margaret Flowers, who also ran for Senate here in Maryland, Kevin Zeese, who's a longtime advocate, and actually has been a huge advocate, too, for legalization of marijuana for nearly 20 years now, not just for the medicinal uses, but understanding the impacts of the war on drugs in communities of color and what that means. But these folks who helped me and exposed me to different policy, and then some of it was research on my own of just watching documentaries, reading books, reading articles, and looking at things to find out about things. And so public banking is something that it already exists in the state of North Dakota, and they've seen great successes with that. So I just wanted to bring that model here to Baltimore and show what the possibility is for, one, we know that we live in a capitalistic society, so we're not just going to be able to remove profit-driven world, but what we can do if we can save money and generate more revenue to be able to make other investments. And so that's what public banking gives us the ability to do. And it's really a great concept. Basically, understanding that banks get rich off of other people's money. And so knowing that right now our city's budget in Baltimore is sitting in a bank on Wall Street, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, choose one. It's sitting in that bank, and that bank is getting rich off of our tax dollars just for it to sit there. And so if we were, and then they take that money and they make investments with it, and they make their CEOs and their investors wealthy, and the city doesn't see return on it. And if we were to simply just take our money away from that bank on Wall Street and put it in our own Baltimore City Public Bank that was managed and ran by people hired by the city to take our money and make the exact same investments with it that they do on Wall Street. But every penny of interest earned, instead of going to some rich guy's pocket, comes back to the city of Baltimore. And so public banking is a great opportunity and something that I hope that the current administration and the city council chooses to pursue, because it's an opportunity for us to really build wealth strategically and have the money necessary to be able to make investments in other parts of the city, or of course we know it comes back to where we don't have the money in most cases. So public banking gives us the ability to leverage our own budget and create wealth within the city.
Okay, now I definitely think that you brought that idea to the forefront of people's consciousness. So it's definitely something that I think people will look into, and it's on people's radar now. I was wondering, do you currently have strong relationships with the new administration in the city?
No, I wouldn't say. I mean, I know them. They know me, of course.
Right.
But I have some relationships with the city council, but not with the mayor's office. Everyone keeps asking me if I'm going to work for or with the mayor's office in the current administration. I'm not opposed to that. Again, not being someone who's wanted to be a politician my whole life, I'm about solutions, and whoever implements it doesn't matter to me as long as it gets done. And so I'm willing to work with anyone who's serious about making sure that our city works for all of us and bringing great ideas and great policy solutions to the table. And so ultimately that decision isn't up to me. That will be up to the new mayor and her cabinet if they're interested in having someone with the ideas and the vision to really help move the city forward, like myself, to be a part of their administration.
Okay, that's dope. So I guess, currently, since the election has passed and everything, what projects and initiatives are you working on now that you can speak about?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I'm back to work in the community in just a few days. I have my own nonprofit. Of course, I spoke on it earlier, called Hollins Creative Placemaking, and we're having our 4th annual Jingle Jam holiday community celebration. And so we're going to be giving away toys to families in need, giving away coats to those in need. We're going to have food and drink, and we're going to have a big community celebration. And so that's going to be fun. Hollins Creative Placemaking is going to be growing, and we're restructuring our board and our organization right now so that we can maximize our growth potential. I'm going to be launching what we call Impact Baltimore. And that's going to be an initiative here where we're working with some former Senator Bernie Sanders campaign staffers, his former director of African American Outreach, Senator Nina Turner and Dr. Cornel West sit on the national board. And we want to continue civic engagement and keep people engaged beyond just election season. So we want to train community members on where to find information, how they can organize and lobby effectively on behalf of issues in their community, where to go to with concerns, and all of those things that aren't often known by everyday citizens. We want to teach them and train them on how to do grassroots organizing and communicate with people and go into the community and really begin to build their own political power. And so that's something that I'm excited that's coming in the new year. And I'm sure there'll be other things that I'm going to be working on, but those are the two things right now that I'm working on for sure.
Okay, when do you find time to sleep?
Whenever I'm not taking notes and planning and trying to figure out how to improve the city. Because there's still plenty of work to do, even though I'm not in office.
Right.
There's more than enough work to do for sure. And this is something, too. We can figure out how to create equity in an equitable city and equitable development and economic development that is built upon addressing issues of social justice. We can scale that up to the state level and to our nation, of course. But we have to start locally and think globally.
Right, definitely. And, another thing that you talk about a lot are the arts. And I always thought that was kind of interesting coming from more of a sports guy. But, I definitely appreciate your dedication to the arts and, what it can do for communities. So I was wondering, what locally, in terms of art and music and everything are you checking for now?
Well, I'm excited. Actually, the Be More Beat Club has a big show coming up in the next week, I think. Yeah, next week. I'm a huge music fan. I love music. I'm not musically inclined, but I love music. J. Cole just dropped his new album, so I'm about to dive into that. But I talk about arts a lot because it's a huge component of bringing people together. Because we all love art and we all love music. And for me, art is so many different things. So for me, art was sports. For someone else, it could actually be music. Someone else, it could actually be painting. But art is much more than our contemporary view of the term art. And it's so many things. I think that's part of what exposes us to things. That's part of what brings us together, and it's part of what opens up doors to expose us to the world of possibilities. And so art is huge when it comes to really building a sense of community. And historically, when you look at movements, great movements, there's usually some form of art or cultural movement that happens before that political movement occurs, if you will.
That's right. You have to have a soundtrack to the movement, and all of the visual art kind of provide like a time capsule for everything that's happened. So I definitely get where you're coming from with that.
And also, really quickly too, we have to understand that art influences cultural movements. So whether you look at the civil rights movement and folks like Muhammad Ali and Harry Belafonte, who were artists in their own right. Muhammad Ali, of course, an artist in the ring and through sports. And then, of course, Harry Belafonte, a musician. And they used their influence because people loved them for their art. And they had an audience that many other people did not have, and they used it to support the civil rights movement and to push forward that agenda. And so I believe artists today, whether locally or nationally, have the exact same opportunity and, quite frankly, responsibility to do similar work. And I'm excited to be in the age of Kendrick Lamar and a J. Cole and a Chance the Rapper, folks who are really not just producing art, but using their stage and their platform as artists to drive people in a direction that is more conscious and more aware of being civically engaged.
Right. Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And it's kind of interesting because, when it comes to hip hop, especially, There are a lot of complaints about, a lot of the content that comes through in the music. But when you look at, hip hop in 2005 and 2006 versus, where it's at now, there's a lot more of a conscious awareness coming through. And I think the life influences the artist, and then in turn the artists go back and influence more of the life. As people become more aware, the artists become more aware, and then they make more people aware. So, I definitely, see that progression in the music. I'm trying to think. J. Cole dropped. You have Kendrick, Killer Mike. There's a whole lot of people. Anything else in your playlist right now?
In my playlist, I'm trying to get caught up on my playlist, see what I missed in the last year of campaigning. But I like music. I like all sorts of music, even beyond hip hop. I'm just a music fan. I think that music really can shape us and move us and inspire us to do different things. So yeah, there's a whole lot, and I got to get caught up on it. Sure.
And I was wondering too, when it comes to music, the thing between Baltimore and Chicago, we have the Baltimore club music, and Chicago is known for the house music. So I was wondering, did you have the house music influence coming up, and do you gravitate towards the Baltimore sound any?
Absolutely. I mean, I like both of them. They both have their very distinct characteristics. I grew up listening to house music, and had a red mixtape and a blue mixtape with the DJs on it, and recorded the mixes on the radio when they played them, house music and all of that. And even used to footwork a little bit to house music. So definitely influenced me as a part of my upbringing for sure. But I just love music again. So I do like Baltimore house music. They're it's actually, I guess, kind of similar to Chicago house music. And so I definitely like it.
That's what's up, man. And I guess in closing, is there anything else that you would like to put out there for the people? When is your Jingle Jam?
So it's actually going to be Saturday, the 17th of December. Yeah, Saturday, the 17th of December at 12 o'clock. It's at 1200 West Baltimore Street. And if anyone has donations or would like to volunteer or knows a family in need, they can email us or visit hollinsart.org. And we can help them out and connect them with the right folks then through there. And so, I just appreciate the opportunity to talk to you guys and to thank you for doing an in-depth interview. I think this is probably the most in-depth interview I've ever done, actually.
Oh, wow.
Asking me questions and really getting to know kind of who is Josh, and where he come from and what does he stand for. So I appreciate it. There's plenty of work for me to continue to do, even not being in office. Again, Definitely. It's about solutions. So I'm not going anywhere. I'm always going to be, as Cole would say, a man of the people, not above but equal.
I think that's the defining quote right there, man.
Well, is there any chance we will see you back on the campaign trail in the next several years?
Well, I mean, we got midterm elections coming up in 2018, and then 2020 is around the corner. Honestly, I haven't decided just yet if I want to run again. Campaigning is a lot of work. There's a whole lot that goes into it. You got to have a good team, and we did a lot of work to make a lot of noise in my campaign with a very small budget and very few people. And so it's really about whether or not we can bring the right team together and whether or not there's a need for me to run. Again, if someone else is implementing solutions and doing the right things, I am perfectly okay staying on the ground and doing work in the community. But if there's a need and the people call for it and feel that there's a need, then I'm here to serve.
Well, definitely, we'll definitely be looking out for you out here, in the community. I know that you do a lot, and I know that you spent a lot of time knocking on a lot of doors, and, your effort definitely got the word out on a lot of different policy that, might not have been in the forefront of people's minds, and, to the point where I think you got, 10% of the vote as a third party?
Somewhere it's fluctuated. The numbers are different between 10 and 13%, depending on where the numbers are coming from.
Right.
So there's been that question, but 22,000 votes roughly.
Okay. I mean that shook up, I think, the whole situation in the city, and I think it definitely let people know that, something has to change, because if you don't change it, somebody else is going to come and they will. And you showed that it is possible. And the next time around, if things aren't right, then that numbers can definitely go up. So, we appreciate all your work and all your effort. And thank you so much for, giving us your time and gracing our platform here, man. Really appreciate it.
No, thank you. I appreciate it. And one last thing I'd like to say is that I'm a millennial like you guys. And so the largest voting block or the largest constituency, shall I say, in the city and around most of the country is young people, 18 to 30. And so we really yield a lot of power that we have yet to transfer into political power. And so I'm excited to see young people get more involved in politics and understanding at least how it intersects with their daily lives. And so continue to do the work that you do because it's reaching a lot of people and hopefully educating people on how they can be involved and what they can do to try to change the system. So again, thank you for the opportunity.
No problem, man. And with that, Channel 10 Podcast, channel10podcast.com, and we out. Peace.
Peace.
Feeling is here.
Yeah, son, you feel it, man. Word up, son. You gotta just do it, yo.
CNN.
Yo, word up, man. It's a different channel, son. Word up, on, man. Word up, watch the channel, son. Different plane now, man.
It's all good.
Word up, all good, baby, in every hood, son. Word up, yo. CNN, Network, Channel 10. It's on again. Street niggas is grown men.